Hi everyone, this is Koinzell here. So thanks for your patience. It's been a week since I did a video because of technical issues, really technical issues where my display had an issue. So I'm not going to go into that since I already covered that in my community post. So what I have for you here today is the next series or the next math guide in the Shenhe math guide series where we will focus on Ganyu freeze-com. So previously I already did a comparison against Bennett. I did a run through of Shenhe's kit. I did a detailed look into Milkcom buff as well. Shenhe in the Milkcom. So now we're going to look at Shenhe in a Ganyu freeze-com. So this is what we're going to run through today. I'll just do a quick intro. So we'll talk about Ganyu and Venti stats. We'll talk about how Ganyu freeze-com works for Shenhe and the rotation that we will do in this particular com. Mona is replaceable with Komi here. Oh, Venti, and because I'm using Venti's figures, you can't expect the same type of figures on other animal characters, but more or less the same. At least between Venti and Sucrose, because their infusion damage multiplier is very close, whereas for Kazuha it'll be different. But they are all usable. It's just that how should I put it? Ganyu, Venti, Mona, Diona is like the original freeze-com, OG freeze-com, and which is the reason why I'm using this com for the math. There's just too many permutations, so I have to choose one to do the math on. Okay. Now, Shenhe damage buff difference for Ganyu, we will look into that in terms of figures. We also look at Shenhe's buffs without stats because, how should I put it? Most people, they only focus on her stats and say that she's bad because once her stats expire, she doesn't do anything. That's not true. She actually provides quite a decent buff without her stats, and we'll look at the figures for those. Likewise, the same for Venti. Why Venti? Because it's very simple. Venti is going to infuse Cryo in his burst. He's going to be dealing Cryo damage, which means that he's going to get Shenhe's buff stats as well. Okay? This is the reason why freeze-com is good, because, or rather this is the reason why Shenhe is good in freeze-com, because 3 members are going to be dealing cryo damage. The 2 cryo characters, obviously, and by characters I mean actual cryo characters dealing cryo damage, not like Eula. Eula is really more of a physical character. And then you have the animal character infusing cryo dealing cryo damage as well. Okay, so 3 members dealing damage in the entire team. And 3 members dealing cryo damage in the entire team, and all 3 of them get Shenhe's buff. And then we will go into the TLDR. We'll talk about against single target, which is one of freeze-com's lowest DPS situation due to the loss of quadratic scaling. And then you have multiple targets, which is the strongest thanks to quadratic scaling, and these 2 are basically covering the 2 ends of the spectrum. And I'll talk about some additional points to consider with regards to Shenhe and freeze-com, or Ganyu freeze-com. Alright, now, the intro is a bit longer than I wanted to, but I felt the need to do the proper flow. So now let's go into the video itself, the content itself. So the Ganyu Venti stats here are based on my actual characters since we are focusing on buff effects. One important thing to note is that I'm not factoring in Ganyu in C4 to simplify my math, and also because that constellation takes time to stack up and it's more effective second burst onwards. So for simplicity's sake, I'm not including Ganyu C4, but what I'm trying to say is that the damage figures should be higher with Ganyu C4 included. So Ganyu stats here are the same as per what I use in the Ganyu Milkcom, because no change to my Ganyu artifacts, etc. So 2575 attack, almost 65 CR, 210 CD, R5 Amos. And for Venti, I have a crit build Venti because I don't have enough EM pieces to go around. Honestly speaking, there's Kazuha that needs full EM, there's Sucrose that needs full EM, there's Sayu that needs half EM, half attack hybrid build. So I really don't have enough EM pieces for Venti. And besides, while farming all those EM pieces, I also did get some decent crit build pieces, so that's the reason why my Venti is using crit build. And yes, I know they are not the best artifact stats because we only have 1660 attack, 59.51 CR with 159 CD, 153.4 ER with R5 stringless. But if you look at my stats, right, if I have a Skyward Hub it will be very, very good. It's just that we are using R5 Stringless because R5 Stringless really is the BIS for Venti. Okay? Even on a creep build. Because the damage buff provided by the weapon effect plus the EM provided also helps with the sword damage. Even if you're not fully focused on EM. Because if you know how EM works, you get the most EM out of the first few hundred. Or I shouldn't say you get the most out of it, but it's more like there is also diminishing return for EM. Okay? But I'm not farming for more VV at the moment, especially when the other piece is Maiden's Beloved, and now you have a much better healer set, which is the Ocean Hued Clam. So these are the stats for my Venti. We'll talk about Ganyu Freezecrom next. So Ganyu's burst, I think everyone should know. In Freezecrom, she has quadratic scaling where her Icicle can damage more. Each Icicle can damage more than one enemy if they are within the AoE range, which is about 1 Abyss Tau. So the quadratic scaling is going to consume her stats really crazily, really fast. But if you consider the boost that it provides along with the fact that a cryo-infused burst will be buffed as well, i.e. 3 buffed bursts, do we really need the stats to last throughout the burst? I'll show you guys what is the amount of boost that it provides as well. So by making use of the fact that her buff duration, and by her here I mean Shenhe, by making use of the fact that Shenhe's buff, let me just make that clear. By making use of the fact that Shenhe's buff duration and cooldown is the same, we can do all the necessary reading and setup and utilize her stats towards the end of duration. Which means that after the towards the end or in the middle of it, which means that after the first wave of mobs are cleared by the crazily buff damage, you can use her skill again to gain stats for next wave, or if there is a single boss character left. Example, Abyss Harat / Letter left after 2 Abyss Major State. You know which Abyss floor I'm talking about, yeah? So remember, most cryo-infused bursts, the additional elemental damage portion, as well as Ganyu's burst itself, they do not have high talent modifiers. Which means they gain a lot more from Shenhe's buff compared to like Ganyu's charge attack or even Ayaka's burst. Although Ayaka's burst talent multipliers aren't as high as Ganyu's charge attack. But anyway, on Ganyu's charge attack, I already covered that previously in the Melcom buff video. It still provides a very, very nice boost. Okay. So now let's talk about the rotation. What should we do in a Ganyu, Venti, Mona, Shenhe comp? Now bear in mind, this is again based on my analysis. We have not had a chance to test it out since I don't have Shenhe to test with. Okay, so Shenhe, we start with a Shenhe E hold if you have C1, followed by a Shenhe E press. So if you don't have C1, obviously you go straight to E press, right? If you have C1, you use both stats immediately, both charges immediately. You do a hold and a press. Hold grants you 7 stats, press grants you 5 stats. Press gives you bonus damage 15% to the burst and elemental skill. Hold gives you to NACA and PA. Okay, normal attacks, charge attacks, plunging attacks. So this is the rotation. After using Shenhe's elemental skill, we go cast Shenhe's burst immediately because Shenhe's burst is the one that provides all the buffs without her buff stats. And then we have Ganyu, casting Ganyu burst followed by E, Venti E followed by Q. So E is elemental skill, Q is burst in case you don't know it yet. Mona EQ. So the reason why we're doing Venti EQ and Mona EQ is because of how fast the animation can be cancelled. It's really, really fast. You can barely see it actually, in terms of the animation. That's how fast it can be cancelled. And following that, once this is set up, basically your freeze bursts are all out there. And you do one final Shenhe E press, because by this time, the cooldown will have been completed. I have actually tested this out in-game. It's about 9 seconds. So by the time you reach here and factoring in Shenhe's cast time, it should match. And okay, let me change this portion. This is actually covered in the text below. Okay, so after you cast her E press, then you can obviously go ahead and use your Ganyu's charge attacks as per how you usually do in a Freezecrom. But just bear in mind that these charge attacks will not have any buff stats, which is fine because you still get the other buffs as long as you are standing within Shenhe's burst. And not all of them require you to stand within Shenhe's burst, by the way. Now another potential option for C1 would be to use hold plus press at the end of Mona burst, which is here. But what I'm recommending here, by doing the 2 charges at the start, it pretty much guarantees you always have 1 charge ready for the next Ganyu burst, since hold cooldown is since hold cooldown is 15 seconds and Ganyu burst is 15 seconds. But even without C1, it should still match smoothly, since we are casting the second Shenhe E mid Ganyu burst. See, there's the amount of time spent here, then you cast Shenhe E. So it's about mid of Ganyu burst. You may have 1 to 2 seconds of a gap, but a Ganyu charge attack easily covers that. But here's the thing. Shenhe's cooldown is 20 seconds, so it will stretch out the rotation more. You may need to do more than 1 to 2 CA, but that is not because of how the rotation is not being placed smoothly or whatever. It's really because Shenhe has a 20-second cooldown. This is also the reason why I say you can replace Mona with Kokomi if you want healing rather than the Omen buff. Because Kokomi also stretches it by 20 seconds unless you are using Sacrificial. And another thing to note about the hold plus press at the start, it will also give you more stats initially, making your first wave damage even higher. And if you have C4, I know it is real territory, but I gotta cover all aspects of the character. So if you have C4, using hold plus press at start will also give you 36 stats for the C4 effect in Freezecom, which means you get 12 stats per character during cryo damage. You have 3 doing cryo damage, Shenhe, Ganyu, Venti. By the time you're able to do this, these will have 36 stats ready for the C4 effect, which gives you, if I didn't remember wrongly, 5% damage boost per stack. So it's very nice. The setup is very smooth for this, at least based on what I have analyzed now. So now we'll look into the Shenhe buff figures, but not the full rotation damage, because there's too much variation due to quadratic scaling. If I do the full rotation, I have to consider what scenarios we will have quadratic scaling, what scenarios are the mobs near enough. There's way too much variation, so we'll just look at the buff figures here. Okay, so these are the buff figures for Shenhe buffing Ganyu. So this is Ganyu's burst damage. This is level 9 burst. Without Shenhe buff, it does about 6.7k to 7.2k. But with Shenhe's buff, it does 18k to 22.5k. So about 19, let's just round them up, 19 to 23k as you go from C0 to C5. So the actual delta, the change, the buff itself is 10k. 10k to 13k, ranging from 10k to 13k. So it's crazy. And then, okay, you might be sharp-eyed and you see that this figure adding to this figure doesn't match to this figure. Is because this only considers the buff stats. This doesn't include the buff without stats. Okay, so this figure here is buff stats plus this figure plus the buff effect onto these figures as well. The buff outside of stats. Okay, and I just wanted to explain this for the guys who are more into math. So this is the percentage difference that we are looking at. You have my standard permutation with regards to Shenhe. You have a 2 Glad 2 Shime attack buffer, you have a 2 Shime attack, 2 Glad with ER sense. Then you have 4-piece Blizzard, main sub DPS, hybrid, and 2-piece Blizzard, 2-piece Shime sub DPS. So for the purpose of my math today, we will be focusing on the figures here. Okay, the ER sense attack build. So an Icicle from Ganyu is nice to have Ganyu here too. An Icicle for Ganyu's level 9 burst is buffed by 135% to 166%, with a full attack buffer ER sense Shenhe with R1 Calamity. So I'm talking about this figure and this figure here. Or this figure. Okay. Again, let me just explain. This is the same format as what we have in the Ganyu Meltcom. C1 here, outside of the bracket, refers to either Ganyu or Venti, depending on which character I'm talking about now. In the bracket, this constellation figure is Shenhe's constellation. So C2 level 9 buff here refers to C2 Shenhe. Okay. So given the quadratic scaling of Ganyu's burst icicles, against 2 enemies, you consume 4 stats in 1 wave of shots. Assuming the 2 shots are dealt at the same time. But If you know how Ganyu's burst works, it doesn't really work that way. She basically drops one shot every 0.3 seconds. But more or less close enough for this way of describing. Yeah, actually I covered it here. So against 3 enemies, 9 stats will be consumed one wave of shards. It's quadratic scaling. So in other words, right, for a freeze comp scenario where you would typically be grouping enemies together, provided the enemies can be pulled by your animal burst, or whether your burst or skill, as long as your animal character is pulling, we can assume that the stats will be consumed within one wave of shards. This means that we can expect a good momentary boost of 135 to 166%. And this is plus 135 and plus 166. It's not times 166. So the actual effect is something like 2.35x the damage to 2.6x the damage. Which is crazy, right? Which is actually really good, right? I mean, I'm trying to be modest here by saying that it's a good momentary boost, but I think it's a very good momentary boost. For the first 5 or 12, if you use Hold plus Press at the start with C1 Shenhe stats within the first wave. Okay, so within your first wave of mobs that is being pulled by your freeze comp, you're going to get a momentary boost of 135 to 166% for that first wave, for the first 5 of 12 stats. What this means is that it really clears the first wave real fast, because you're dealing 2.5 times the damage now. Although for a limited number of stats, but it's good enough within that first wave. And when the rotation reaches C0 Shenhe to cast her elemental skill again, remember I talked about her rotation where you're able to cast her Shenhe E press again mid-burst, based on the setup. Okay, so your second wave or third wave, depending on how fast you clear the mobs, you will get another 5 to 12 stats boost of 135 to 166%. Now, why I say 5 to 12 here is in case you intend to use the C1 effect, the 2 charges, when your Ganyu's burst is already cast. Different people, different preference. Like I said, in my rotation, I cast it first, but you can do it here, to do the double here instead of here. But I personally want to do it here so that I can achieve these benefits. These two. Okay? So in terms of damage figures, it's a difference of 91k to 202k. Absolute flat damage figures wise. And this range is because it ranges from C0 to C5 Shenhe. So pretty decent. Yeah, we are getting double the amount of flat damage, more than double the amount of flat damage when we go from C0 to C5 Shenhe. And this figure is in total. If there's more than one enemy, this damage needs to be divided accordingly. So example, against 5 enemies, it's about 18k to 14k each. But now these figures may not seem big, not like Itto's damage, right? But remember, these are added on top of the existing. And how much does Ganyu's Icicle do? The existing damage. Each Icicle has a low damage multiplier, so it's only giving you something like 6k, 7k. Now we're talking about 18k to 14k. So it's a boost of more than 100%. So it's more like a... It's more like a burst slash surge in DPS. The way Shenhe buff works, at least for her stats. And on top of that, Shenhe is able to buff even without stats. Okay? So how she works basically is, in a freeze comp, you're gonna have a wave of enemies. You are essentially using her to give you a burst of surge in DPS for a specific wave. Think of it that way. Okay? So, let's talk about Shenhe's buffs without stats. Oh my god, what happened here? Okay. I understand what happened here. My level 12 figures came here. But it's okay. You can ignore this for the moment, for the time being. Because I actually did a level 12 burst figure, but I wasn't intending to show it initially. Okay, so without stats, this is the type of damage that we can provide, or rather Shenhe can provide. So you look at the damage here, it's pretty decent, right? You're getting about 26% boost, 25% boost. If I look at ER sense, we have 25 to 31%. So it's 25%. Actually, I should say 26% here. Sorry. So the buff that Shenhe provides without stats are quite substantial even at C0. It's 26% if you use press skill, 16% if you use hold. Obviously, you shouldn't only use hold, you should use press. Because press, although press gives you lesser stats, it also gives you buff to elemental burst and skill for everyone in the party. And your freeze coin is all about using those. So I definitely recommend using press. And in my rotation, I have also used press. And another thing to note is that these buffs here, they last throughout Ganyu's burst, almost. And it definitely does if you have C2 Shenhe, because C2 Shenhe increases the duration from 12 to 18 seconds. For Ganyu's burst, right, it's 15 seconds. So, and Shenhe's burst is cast before Ganyu's burst. So the buff is going to last for about 11 seconds of Ganyu's burst. That's why I say it lasts almost throughout. But it will definitely last throughout if you have C2 Shenhe. And more importantly, Shenhe doesn't just buff Ganyu, but Venti's cryo infused burst as well. So let's bring in Venti's figures now. In all this is the level 12 burst figures. Applicable if you are a wheel. Because in order to have a level 12 burst, you need really high constellation. I can't remember if it's C3 or C5 for her. But anyway, this is the percentage difference. It's slightly lower because our burst damage multiplier is higher. Remember what I said? Shenhe's burst multiplier increases, or rather, not Shenhe's buff stats increases in terms of percentage, relative percentage wise, when the talent multipliers are lower. Okay, now we have the Shenhe buff damage difference for Venti now. So my creep build Venti stats are already shared. I just want to call out 2 more points. Creep build Venti will benefit a lot more for Shenhe than EM Venti. In terms of the percentage, it's actually going to be the same, but absolute figure wise, creep build Venti will do more with Shenhe's buff. Creep build Venti with good rolls will also perform better than EM Venti to begin with, even if Shenhe is not in the picture. I hope that this is something that is clear enough to most folks. If you use a R5 stringless with good creep rolls, it will perform better than a pure EM Venti. It's just that, in a sense, you can say that EM Venti is easier to build than creep Venti, because there are people who are unlucky and can't get EM main stat pieces as well. So, depends on your luck. But generally speaking, EM Venti is easier to build. But like I said, I don't have enough EM pieces. I have 2.5 characters using EM pieces now. I just don't have enough EM pieces for Venti. And while you're farming those EM pieces, you will get creep pieces. So it's fine to give it to Venti. Right now, my Cell and my Venti are using the creep pieces. 2 VV pieces on Cell, 4 VV pieces on Venti. So these are not the best stats, but I think they're good enough to work with. And this is the Venti damage figures. This is his animal damage, which is about 20 ticks, 20 ticks within his 8-second burst. And then you have the elemental infusion. If we infuse cryo, it's about 1.1k for 16 ticks within his burst. Not exactly the high damage figure per se. And this is already with VV effect included. Sorry, there's a typo here. Okay, so with Shenhe buff, the animal doesn't gain much of a buff because the only buff that it gets is the 15% bonus from the press effect. The cryo is the one that gets a crazy amount of boost. Just look at this. It jumps from 1.1k to 11k. Which makes sense, right? Because previously when we saw what the flat damage, actual damage that Shenhe gave, it was about 10k. 10 to 13k. So same thing here, it's going to give about 10 to 13k. It's a huge boost. It's honestly crazy, especially think about how fast Venti's, how how Venti works, right, is small damage, high number of ticks. So now we essentially push a huge damage in for one wave. But you notice that the actual buff damage is slightly lower on Venti. Instead of 10k to 13k, it's like 9.6k to 12.5k. And the reason why is because of his crit stats. Right, his crit stats aren't that great compared to my Ganyu. But the percentage is crazy. Look at this. 2-piece Shime, ER sense, you have 756%, up to 98%. 988%. And if you have C1 Ganyu, the percentages also increases because C1 Ganyu also provides you resistance strat, right? Sorry. Everything is coming together. Now, this is such a crazy amount of buff, it blows my mind. But of course, this is in terms of relative percentage. In terms of absolute damage, that damage doesn't change, but still, it helps a lot. You can see it this way, right? Basically, your Venti suddenly does 8.5 adds to 11 times the damage. All of a sudden, 8.5 times to 11 times the damage is being dealt up front. It's very nice. Yeah, so this is what I'm talking about. It's a whopping 756% to 98%. And it's not surprising because Venti's elemental infusion damage has a very low multiplier of 32%. And if you using the rotation I mentioned, we will get 10 buff instances at C0 and 17 buff instances at C1+. Although they may not be all at the same wave, but in total, that's the amount of buff instances that we'll have. So think of it this way, okay? The Venti's burst does 16 ticks, which means that your Venti's cryo infusion with the Shenhe stats, it can last throughout if it's a single target with C1 Shenhe. All of a sudden, my Venti is dealing 8.5 adds to 11 times the damage throughout. It's mind-blowing if you think of it that way. So the important thing I want to say here is if the elemental hits are AoE, which they should be, I haven't had the chance to really look into it because there's just way too many figures in a Venti in a freeze comb burst. The buff instances are to be divided accordingly, but it still fits my whole description about the whole burst in DPS in one wave, right? And also, by the way, I am assuming Cryo Swers do not consume the Shenhe buff stats because the damage formula is completely different. The way Cryo Sword damage is, or rather Sword damage is calculated, is completely different. Unless MiHoYo is going to combine their two separate damage formulas together. I.e., you take the Shenhe buff stats, applies Venti's damage bonuses, CRCD, and calculate it, and then add on to a separately calculated Sword damage. But anyway, regardless of whether it does or does not, if it does, it fits the whole burst in DPS situation anyway, right? It still fits the whole burst in DPS situation. If it uses the stack, it just means that you deal more damage upfront. So that's even better. So for the ease of math here, I'll just assume that the stats are consumed by the first wave of mobs anyway. Okay? So this means we can expect a huge momentary boost of 756% to 98% for the first 5 or 12. And when you reach Shenhe's turn to cast at skill again, you get another 5 or 12 depending on how you use when you use your double charges with C1 Shenhe. So in terms of absolute damage figures, it's about 87k to 194k. If more than one enemy, this damage is to be divided accordingly. Now remember the 87k to 194k, like I said, right, this figure has not taken into account whether this has been buff or not. One of the variation there, resulting in this difference. So if against 5 enemies, it's about 17 to 39k. Again, doesn't feel huge, right? But now, you are adding 17k to 39k to Ganyu's figure as well. Okay? So like I mentioned, the absolute figures are smaller on Venti because the CR/CD stats are lower than Ganyu. And I hope this also serves as a preview to you guys that the CR/CD of your characters during the cryo damage will affect your Shenhe buff figures proportionally. And now let's look at the effect of Shenhe's buffs without any stats to Venti's burst. So these are the figures. They don't look huge absolute figure wise. Percentage wise is fairly decent. You get 7% boost across the animal burst damage for Venti because of the passive that gives you 15% burst and skill damage bonus upon using her Shenhe's press. Then for the cryo damage, we have 14 to 21%, 18 to 26, and 19 to 26. It increases as your Shenhe constellations increases. So it's about 14 to 26% for cryo infusion, 7% for animal boost, and these buffs will definitely last throughout Venti's burst since Venti burst is only 8 seconds. So it's 100% throughout. Okay, now let's look at the Shenhe's buffs to freeze comp. Let's collate the figures together. So I already mentioned 91k to 202k for Ganyu, 87k to 194k for the two of them. So total, you have 178k to 396k. Just on these two characters, not including Shenhe. And if it's against 5 enemies, it's about 35k to 79k, which is a very nice damage boost, right? And bear in mind, these figures are just from the stats buff. There's still 26-31% buff for Ganyu and 14-26%, even without her stats. Because all these factors, right? All of these different bonuses giving you this type of buffs here. So now the figures are starting to look much better, especially considering it allows freeze comp to get a huge surge in DPS against enemy waves. If you have used freeze comp before, you know what I mean. Especially when your Venti burst is still active and your first wave of enemies are cleared. Your second wave of enemies will respawn and be put into your Venti's burst, and that's how one rotation can clear up to 2 waves right now without Shenhe. So if you have Shenhe's buffs, what happens is that you should be able to clear the first wave almost immediately, and then you have your second wave coming in, which will also receive a boost on the Mona side. If you are not using Mona, fine, you'll still be able to clear it, and you potentially have 3 waves cleared with 1 rotation because you can cast your Shenhe's E and provide stats to all 3 characters again. So effectively, if your cryo damage dealing characters like Ganyu and Venti are built with good enough stats, Shenhe will allow your freeze comp rotation to clear 2 to 3 waves compared to the current 1 to 2 waves. I mean, for me personally, that's what I noticed. My Ganyu freeze comp clears about 1 to 2 waves, depending on the mob stats as well, the mob level as well. But what I feel is that, I shouldn't say what I feel. Based on the analysis that we have here, based on the math that we have here, I do believe that freeze comp rotation will allow us to clear 2 to 3 waves compared to the 1 to 2 waves now. And if it's against mobs that in the first place require more than 1 rotation to clear, you should be able to clear lesser rotations total, maybe even 1 rotation. It's hard for me to say because it's very, very dependent on your build. It's very, very dependent on your crit stats. What I can provide here is the percentage which will more or less not change, and also a view of how it will look like if your Ganyu and Venti are decently built. So let's talk about TLDR. So just the Shenhe buff stats alone in freeze comp offers a pretty good damage boost for Ganyu freeze comp figures wise. And if you look at it percentage wise, it's actually very incredible when the stats are active. 135 to 166% boost, and 759% to 988% boost for Venti. Sorry, I just saw a typo here. So effectively, your Ganyu icicle damage is multiplied by around 2.5 times because this is a plus 135%, right? So I'm averaging it to about 2.5%, 2.5x, sorry, not 2.5%, 2.5 times for 10 to 70 instances, depending on whether you have C0, C1. And Venti's infusion damage is multiplied by 8.5x to 11x for 10 to 17 instances. Now let's see the two ends of the spectrum that I talk about, the single target and the multiple target. Let's see with that factored in, how it's going to look like. These instances, right? The number of stats. So I'll say this: Shenhe greatly increases the freeze-com damage and overcomes one of freeze-com's biggest weakness. Because if you have used freeze-com, if you know freeze-com, if you main freeze-com, you know that against single enemy is freeze-com's biggest weakness, because you no longer have the quadratic skilling. So Venti has 16 infusion ticks, cryo infusion ticks. Ganyu does 10 ticks guaranteed and more, depending on the enemy size and movement per enemy. 10 ticks per enemy. I know she does 50 ticks, but she does 10 ticks guaranteed per enemy and more, depending on size and enemy size and movement. So against a single target, Ashtaha you can actually achieve 50 because of how huge she is. Primo Jovishet is about 20 to 25. And a much smaller boss, right, Child, especially his first and second form, is about 10 to 13. So it's only slightly more than the guaranteed 10 stats on someone like Child. So with this in mind, right, basically C0 Shenhe gives you 10 ticks, 10 stats. It's about 62% of Venti's cryo infusion. Okay. For Ganyu, C0 Shenhe buffs about 87% of your total burst damage for Child. Right, 10 to 13. 50% for Primo Jovishet. Approximately 50%. Okay. And approximately 20% for Ashtaha. But Ashtaha is a rare case where all 50 stats can hit to begin with because he's so huge. So I hope this percentage helps you guys appreciate how much it buffs the burst damage on Ganyu, or rather the Ganyu freeze-com. And as for C1 plus Shenhe, you can give 17 stats or 17 ticks, right? So that's 100% of Venti's cryo infusion. C1 plus Shenhe also buffs 100% for Child, approximately 80% for Primo Jovishet, and 33% for Ashtaha. Now, this is assuming that you just use your burst, right? But if you use Ganyu's charge attack while her burst is still buffed, without CC Shenhe, it will consume the stats earlier and reduce the percentage above. But it doesn't matter because the absolute damage she provides from her buff stats are the same whether you deal with charge attack or burst. You're just dealing it earlier. And that's a good thing because you want to do more damage ASAP, right? So, I hope you guys understand that this percentage above, right, is meant to help you appreciate how good her buff stats are against single target. When I say here that it buffs 100% of Venti's cryo infusion, even if Venti swirls, right, the cryo swirls, they consume the stats, even if that happens, it's fine because you are just dealing the damage upfront. That's a good thing. You are dealing more damage upfront. It triggers for example, it triggers the Child next phase even earlier. It kills your Primo Jovishet earlier. You don't need to wait for the full burst. That's better, right? Okay, so I hope the way I'm presenting it here is a good way for you guys to appreciate how great Shenhe is for single target. Basically, Shenhe removes freeze-com's biggest weakness. Or okay, technically speaking, you can say that those mods that you can't freeze might be the biggest weakness, but one of freeze-com's biggest weakness, which is single target, especially for Ganyu freeze-com, because Ayaka doesn't really matter, but for Ganyu freeze-com, single target, you'll notice a huge drop in DPS compared to, say, Ayaka. But Ayaka is a whole different mechanic, so I'll talk about it later or in future in the Ayaka video. But I hope this is a good information to help you see beyond just looking at, oh, her stats are so limited, oh, once your stats are done, you are finished. No, that's not how it works. Or rather, that's how it works, but that's oversimplifying things. Okay? And bear in mind, what I'm talking about here, the percentages are all just based on her stats. We have not included the buffs that she provides without stats, which is 26 to 31% for Ganyu and 14 to 26% for Venti. Still very sizable, still very decent buff. Now let's talk about multiple targets, which is already FreezeComm's stronger situation or stronger suit. So Shenhe still does increase the FreezeComm damage significantly, as per the damage figures and percentage boosts I've shared earlier. It basically allows you to clear your first wave almost immediately, provided you have good enough stats on your Ganyu and Venti, and it will allow you to clear more waves basically for each rotation. And against mods that you initially couldn't clear one wave, you may be able to clear one now. But obviously I can't guarantee it because everyone's CR and CD is different. Some math to help appreciate the boost to multiple targets damage. Okay. Not easily understandable, but I'll try my best. So you have Ganyu icicle damage multiplied by 2.5x for 10 instances on C0 Shenhe. You divide that into 2 waves. That is 2.5x damage immediately for each enemy in a wave of 5 enemies. For the first shot or shots, depending on whether you have quadratic scaling happening. 2.5x damage immediately. For C1 Shenhe, your first wave, let's say assume you use your 2 charges at the start. So first wave has 12 instances, second wave has 5, which can mean 2.5x icicle damage immediately for 6 enemies on the first 2 shots, not just the first shot, but the guaranteed first 2 shots. So up front, you are immediately dealing 2.5x of what you usually do on the first wave. Okay? And Venti's infusion damage is multiplied. Venti's infusion damage is multiplied by 8.5x to 11x for 10 to 17 instances. So C0 Shenhe, 8.5x damage immediately. I'm assuming C0 Shenhe, right? So 8.5x damage immediately for each enemy in a wave of 5 enemies for the first tick in just 0.5 seconds, because that's the first wave and that's how fast Venti ticks. And then you have another wave of ticks again when second Shenhe, or rather another tick with waves of damage when second Shenhe is used. Shenhe E is used. C1 Shenhe, same thing, but it's 6 enemies for the first 2 ticks. So even greater boost. And this happens in 1 second compared to previously 0.5 second. Okay. And another thing again for 5 enemies when third Shenhe E is used. If that's not a huge burst / surge in DPS for the first wave, I don't know what is. Okay. It's huge, right? I mean 2.5 times, 8.5 times. And both of this is going to happen at the same time. That's why I say that in a FreezeComm, your first wave is going to occur real fast. And I have not even included Shenhe's figures yet, because I have not had the time to do the Shenhe math in terms of like adding on her C4, C6, etc. And these are all just buffs from stats. Without stats, she still buffs 26 to 31% for Ganyu, 14 to 26% for Venti, and 7% for Venti's and immobiles as well. So to conclude, right, TLDR, yes, I think she's good in FreezeComm against multiple targets, and absolutely incredible in FreezeComm against single target, at least for Ganyu FreezeComm single target, effectively overcoming one of Ganyu FreezeComm's lowest DPS situation and providing a good boost to FreezeComm's strongest suit, allowing more waves to be cleared in one rotation, especially with her buff's bursty nature with the stats. Okay? I hope this is clear. And before you say that, oh, in that case, Ganyu FreezeComm is worse than Ayaka FreezeComm, that's not how it works, right? Because Ganyu FreezeComm has a much smoother rotation, 15 seconds. Ayaka FreezeComm is on a 20-second rotation. There's also that difference. But more importantly is that Shenhe actually helps Ganyu FreezeComm to overcome its lowest DPS situation while still providing a good boost to FreezeComm, the strongest suit, which is multiple targets. So just because her stats are limited doesn't necessarily mean she's bad. After deep diving into the kit and the math that I've shared, I hope you can see that too. You can see too that even against multiple targets, her stats can provide a substantial boost per wave via the rotation I've shared. It's not just 5 stats, you can make it 10 stats in each rotation even at C0. And for single target, she's actually really good. And lastly, even without stats, she still provides a pretty decent boost. Okay? Now, I'm not being a sim for her, I am really doing objective analysis. I'll be honest with you guys, I wouldn't mind if she's bad, because if she's really bad after I do my math and analysis, then it just means that I save on her, right? Just like Kokomi. I only have a C0 Kokomi, because I already done the math and she's not worth my investment further in her. And I'm glad I saved that money. Okay, now some points to consider, okay? Some additional points to consider. C6 Shenhe will be useless in freeze comp against multiple targets. The C6 Shenhe effect. Because your stats will be gone before you can use your charge attack. Because remember I talked about, right? You get your first wave, and your first wave is going to consider stats, but it's going to almost immediately clear the first wave if your Venti and Ganyu are built well enough. But it's great against single target, the C6 Shenhe. It's great against single target, because remember what I talked about, right? In the single target, you have scenario where you can do this amount of percentage. And what C6 Shenhe does is that it doesn't reduce this percentage. This percentage remains the same. But all in all, I'll say it does reduce the number of use cases for C6 Shenhe because you can't use it against multiple targets. You spend so much to get a C6 of a character, and there are only scenarios where it can work. This is the type of C6 I hate the most, where it's conditional. So for Melcom, C6 Shenhe only helps with the last 1 to 2 charge attacks as well. Because if you've seen my Melcom video, I already talk about it. With all the bursts coming from your other characters, they will clear most of the small mobs, and you will have left only 1 to 2 mobs to work with. I'm assuming your other characters are built. If you use a comp with only your Ganyu build and the other characters are not built well enough, then you can't say that I'm wrong, right? Because what you need to do is to build your other characters. Okay? Genshin is a 4 character party. All 4 characters need to be built. Some of them may require less investment, some more. But I hope you get what I'm talking about here. So honestly, I don't think C6 is a constellation worth getting unless you're willing to spend for lesser value and also to use as a main DPS. But that's a whole different build to begin with. Now, C4 Shenhe will also get the best DPS boost in freeze comp, because you get 36 stats per rotation and 15 plus 36 on the second rotation onwards, which is your 50 stats. This is where your 50 stats comes in, right? It's from the second rotation onwards. Because this 15 comes from your second Shenhe E press that is mid Ganyu burst. By the time you reach your second rotation, start of your second rotation, you're going to be able to do 15 stats. Oh, technically speaking, it's not reaching the 50 stats in one cast, it's in 2 casts. So like the 15 plus 36 here, 15 applies to your whole, 36 applies to your press, which is this part here in the rotation. Oh my god, it's all the way up. Okay. So I'm talking about this portion here where you get 15 stats here and 36 stats here. Okay, sorry, wrong. 15 stats here, 36 stats here. Okay, 15 stats here, 36 stats here. This is if you have C1. C4. The C4 effect. As opposed to Melcom you only get 10 stats for first rotation and 24 stats for second. Because after all, you only have 2 characters dealing cryo damage compared to 3 in freeze comp. Okay, now my rotation assumes Mona here, but Kokomi will do fine as well if you want healing rather than buff. You can use Sacrificial to make sure that you always have it on ready, but even without Sacrificial, 20-second cooldown is still fine because Shenhe is also 20-second cooldown. So in theory, you can also use Kokomi without Sacrificial if you want more healing. And bear in mind that for multiple targets, right, by the time Mona's Omen is ready, the first wave of stats should be gone. That's how I expect the buff to do that much damage. The buff stats. Because Mona's Omen is the last to be applied in the freeze comp. The last burst to be used in the freeze comp. But it's still okay for single targets. You are still able to fully utilize it. Okay? So the reason why her stats buff so much percentage wise is because most cryo bursts have low to medium multipliers with high number of ticks. It's also the reason why her multipliers are so low as well. So for those people who only look at the multiplier and say that she's bad, you have to understand how the character works first. Okay. Okay, however, the decision on whether to go for Shenhe or not, it really depends on whether you have the strong cryo DPS characters to begin with. For example, if Ganyu Rerun banner and Shenhe banner are in the same patch, you don't have Ganyu or Ayaka, I would advise to go for Ganyu rather than Shenhe. Because Shenhe, she's unfortunately dependent on your other cryo characters. So you need them, and you need them to be well built and working well before you bring Shenhe into the mix to further boost them. If you have Ganyu, Venti, Mona, or Kokomi, which are all 5-star characters, I know it's not easy, but there are people who are already using freeze comp, even without spending too much, because there are rerun banners, right, and stuff. Standard character, she was recently on the banner. So the decision to go for Shenhe will really lie on whether you have Diona or Rosara. If for some reason you don't, then obviously Shenhe is good, right? Now the other factor is that if your Ganyu and Venti are well built, especially a creep built Venti, Shenhe will be a great choice to boost your freeze comp, especially single target. She really greatly boosts the single target scenario for Ganyu freeze comp. Now bear in mind, even if your Venti is EM, the percentage boost provided by Shenhe's buff stats are actually still the same. It's still that crazy 756 to 98%. It's just that absolute damage wise is lower, because your absolute damage wise on the cryo infusion to begin with is also low. One thing to note is that Shenhe's energy generation as of now is still bad. I have not seen any new changes since what people were sharing in the beta. I don't know whether that's going to be accurate or not. But if it's bad, she can't really be a battery. And for Ganyu, it's still okay, because Ganyu is not as energy hungry as Ayaka. I do see a potential issue for Shenhe with regards to Ayaka energy wise. Damage wise, if you see how it's like here, you should understand that it's more or less the same for Ayaka. The whole bursty type of concept, right? But her biggest problem is that she can't serve as a battery for Ayaka, and Ayaka really needs a battery in her freeze comp. So that's the issue there, potential issue that I see here. But I've not done the math, so I can't say whether it's worth it to, for example, change your Ayaka sense to an ER sense to offset the loss of battery from Shenhe, but overall DPS increasing because of how much Shenhe buffs. That I have not done the math on, so yep. Okay, so that brings me to the end of this video. Oh my god, it's an hour. So now, the next natural option for video is obviously Ayaka freeze comp, but given that it's holiday season and Shenhe and Yunjin now, which means I may not be able to do videos as frequently, although I have not done it for a week, but yeah, I have to do the holiday celebration stuff. And Shenhe and Yunjin are only 1.5 or 4.5 weeks away. We don't know until we see the announcement, but they may be 1.5 weeks away. So I will be starting Yunjin series first next, instead of doing the Ayaka freeze comp, because I want to be able to at least cover her. And also because I'm very interested in her, especially for Yomiya, for Noelle. Right, by the way, I don't think she's going to outdo C0 Itto. For C6 Noelle to outdo a C0 Itto with Yunjin. Unlikely. I'll do the math, but unlikely. Okay? At least single target wise. And there's so many options, right? You have Child, you have Razor, a lot of other normal attack DPS characters that Yunjin can buff. And I know it looks like Yunjin is a much better buffer than Shenhe in that sense. But, okay, a bit of a spoiler. I have actually done the preliminary math. I've seen the absolute figure that she can provide before applying the buff character's crit damage. I'll tell you this, Yunjin is more flexible in terms of more characters that she can buff, but her buff amount is not as crazy as Shenhe. Okay, it's not as crazy as Shenhe. It's about half in terms of the absolute value. And then when you power in all the damage bonus, etc., then it's going to be a different story. But the fact that she can buff Yoimiya is a huge factor. And I'll probably do Yoimiya as one as the first video, other than just running through Yunjin's kit. And probably Noelle will be the next. And then maybe we'll go back to Ayaka Freezecom then. I also need to do up other weapons for Shenhe, especially for Stations, right? Because so far I've been covering R1 Calamity. One spear I'm thinking of is Lithic Spear actually. Yeah, I know Lithic Spear is not good for co-op, but Lithic Spear is actually not too bad. The attack percentage that it provides. And Wavebreaker Fiend may have some potential too, given its high base attack. Because if you notice how her Calamity works, it's also a very high base attack. So yeah, I'll have to give a bit more thought on that, and we'll cover that when it comes. But first off, I just want to let you know that I will be doing Yunjin next. Okay, so anyway, thanks everyone for watching. Thank you for your patience. And anyway, if you skip to the respective sessions, I hope that the TLDR, as well the points to consider, etc., are good enough to help you appreciate how good Shenhe is in a Venti, in a Ganyu Freezecom. Especially against single target. It's crazy good against single target. Against multiple targets, it's still good. So, thanks everyone for watching. I'll see you guys next video. If you like the content, remember to like the video and click subscribe for more. Bye!